Many of you have heard the story, but in 2014, I went to YouTube and typed in my name in the search bar to see if my music would come up, because I've been putting my music out on YouTube since 2006. And I did not come up, but a guy named Mark Shepard came up. He was wearing a yellow raincoat, I remember, in this video, and he was taking people on a tour of his farm. And I was blown away by the fact that his farm was just a paradise. It was Eden, and he was doing amazing things, and it was all scalable onto a commercial level. And I was like, this is what we need to do to change the world, you know? Like, if you know me, it's all about changing the world. So I just watched all his videos, and I decided that I too could become a farmer. And so to this day, like, I am doing what I'm doing because of this guy. And over the years, I kept telling myself, I should reach out to him. Like, he seemed like a nice guy. And then I watched some more things, and he gave a talk, and then he picked up a guitar and sang a song that he'd written. And I'm like, the guy writes songs, you know? And then I figured out that he was pretty much the same age as I was. And then I also realized that his middle initial was L. My middle initial is L. And I'm like, come on, this is crazy. And I just, you know, it was the beginning of an intense journey that has led me here to Canton. And I've been a farmer now for 5 years. I was secretly a farmer for many years before that, but that's a whole other story for another day. But this February, it was such a hard winter, and we were losing sheep to this mysterious thing that the snails do to our sheep. And I was like, you know, I need something, I need a little jolt of inspiration. And I went back to YouTube and I typed in Mark Shepard. And again, my music, well, it did come up a little bit, but he still comes up first when you type in Mark Shepard. So the thing is, we're making music together tonight after he does a talk and introduces some of his key ideas to you folks. And I don't know how to describe when you meet somebody who you just get and who gets you, and that's this guy. So make welcome Mark Shepard.
How many of you are old enough to remember Monty Python's Flying Circus? And now for something completely different. So this is a little bit of an anomaly for me, because usually it's very video heavy, and I'll go an hour and a half to like 14 days in a row teaching content about what I'm talking about. But tonight's different because we're just going to play a couple of songs. One of the things that really inspires me is nature. Just look out the window. You guys drove in here. You live in an amazingly beautiful part of the country. Just so beautiful. And what I love about this part of New York is that nobody comes here. Nobody comes here unless they really want to come up here. There's no reason to be here. The soil sucks. The weather's terrible. It's too wet. It's too dry. It's too cold. All of that kind of stuff. The mosquitoes are insane. There's no reason to be here. But think about how amazing nature is around here. That this stuff has been ground to a pulp by ice once upon a time. And when that ice finally melted away and the dust is blowing all over the place, somehow nature came back all by itself. Glaciers wiped everything out. It's just crushed rock. There's no soil. And then all of a sudden there's like a lichen, a little bit of moss. And you think about how bizarre a lichen is. It's like a combination of an algae and what else is with it? There's algae and a fungus. So the algae photosynthesizes. Think about the miracle of that. You've got this green stuff, and you just shine a little sunlight on it, give it a little water, and give it a little air, and it makes sugar. What a trip, what a trip. And then that feeds that sugar to the fungus, and the fungus drips out this acid that dissolves the rock. And then it sucks up all the minerals that are in that, and it feeds it back to the algae, and it goes from there. And as that grows, pretty soon we have more mosses, and we have some ferns, we have some grasses, and then into the grasses come these thorns and bushes and brambles, and over time, a whole entire living ecosystem just appears out of the atmosphere, literally out of the atmosphere. And if you think about sugar, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Where does a plant get carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen? It gets the carbon from the air, it gets the hydrogen from water, it gets water from the air, either directly by taking the mist and the humidity in through its leaves, or by having the water drops fall on it and absorbs it through its skin, I'll call it, or the water that came out of the air goes into the ground, gets sucked into its roots. So these plants, all of nature around us, this is appearing out of thin air. Appearing out of thin air. And where did the soil come from? Where did the soil come from? It came out of thin air. The whole plant community made the soil. And thinking about that, it's like, wow, it's not like where we get our food from. We have farms and we have soil and all this kind of stuff. I grew up in the 70s-ish, which is really fascinating. I'm going to point somebody out, she might turn pink in the face. This is my cousin, Mary Ellen. I used to come up here in the summertime on vacation to visit my Uncle Bill, her dad, on their farm in Canton. They had a couple different places that they were at. And it was some of the most beautiful times for me. We used to come up here, would work like crazy, would play, would go fishing. I'll tell stories about my brother, he'll hate me for it. When it came time to putting the hay way back up in the hay mow, he just got too hot, he couldn't do it, so he had to go like somewhere, and I had to be the one up there grunting the hay back. But it was cool, it was a lot of fun. I grew up, our family, we weren't exactly rich. They were dairy farmers, they weren't exactly rich. And we lived in north central Massachusetts. And when I was a little kid, it was a pretty bustling industrial community. Lots of paper mills. They were doing the secondary paper. They were dyeing bulk paper and turning it into products. A lot of leather factories that made shoes. What else was down there? Do you remember? You don't even remember because you didn't live there. There was textiles, there were like t-shirts and all kinds of stuff. And there was a couple of printing presses. What was the name of the place? Big, huge printing press, these warehouses that went like the length of the town. And then in here comes all these bulk products, and out the end comes like, dictionaries and encyclopedias. Anybody remember what an encyclopedia was? It's like Google and hardbound Google. And so that's where I grew up, and then all of a sudden I was like 8 or 10 years old, and it all started to fall apart. And I found out that a lot of it had to do with the changing of tax law. And so the tax laws were changed to favor American businesses to take those businesses, their factories, and go to other countries that didn't have the same pollution controls. They didn't have to pay the same wages to people. They didn't have to pay insurance. They didn't have to, pay for cleanup or whatever it was. So they could go over to other countries with less regulation, produce the same products and bring them back over here and sell them for less money, and they would make more money. And so I got to see the collapse of industrial civilization right in front of my eyes. Like factory buildings and warehouses for miles and miles, just boom, empty overnight. Obviously, that was hard times for people. My dad and my mom, she was a Vermont dairy girl. He was a Maine bush rat. They started gardening. And this was back just as the whole hippie thing was flowering. And my dad was somewhat famous because he knew how to make this stuff called compost. And all along here, people would come over and watch my dad make compost on the weekends. It was really a pretty colorful time. I was just a little kid. And then the oil-producing and exporting countries of the world decided to cut off our crude oil supply. And within days, all of a sudden, there was like almost no gasoline available. They started rationing when we could get gasoline and how much gasoline we could get. You could only get 5 gallons at a time, and you could only get it on the day. If the last number on your license plate was an odd number, you could only go on odd days. And if it was an even number, you could only go on even days. And really quickly, the gas lines got to be huge. Really, really huge. So my folks immediately had to buy a smaller car. They got a Volkswagen Squareback. Cute little story with the Volkswagen Squareback. Her youngest son, Bo, was a little bit of an imp when he was imp is a nice kind of troublemaking word, right? Yeah. We had come up to visit. We're going to hang out at the farm for a week or so, and on the way up, me and my brother, we're going to treat ourselves. So we get the Dunkin' Donuts, the holes, the donut holes. What do they call those? Munchkins. She got this big box of like 48 Dunkin' Munchkins. And park the car in the yard, everybody goes in to greet everybody, and my parents left the windows cracked a little bit so it wouldn't get too hot in there. So we go in, we greet everybody, and then her mom's like, "Where's Bo? Where's Bo?" We can't find Bo anywhere. Well, Bo went into the car, climbs up, he's like 3, gets into the car, finds the Dunkin' Munchkins, rolls up the window and locks all the doors. That was like my first experience with Bo at their farm. So we got the smaller car. All these steps that we took are supposed to help us to get through these tough times. Well, now we get back to Massachusetts. We have the whole oil embargo thing is going on. We really had to grow a lot of food, and probably my dad's garden was up to about 2 acres at one point in time. Being the oldest son, of course, I got conscripted. Has anyone ever heard of conscription before? It's forced labor with no pay. I used to hate it. In a garden, we're told, of course you gotta clear all the brush and all the land, and you plow it all up, you turn it over with a shovel or a rototiller, and then you get out there and you slave away in the dirt, and you get hot, the sweat starts running down, you have this mud streaking down your face, and we had the biggest garden of anybody. And we grew compost, and I had to turn the compost, and I'd take these big wheelbarrow loads full of compost. I'm 10 years old, you know. Now you scatter this compost on the garden, you get these little black crumbs on this lousy Canton soil. And I'm thinking to myself, this is really stupid. This is really, really stupid. How is this going to actually feed us? We had all kinds of tomatoes and onions and squash and pumpkin, beautiful gardens. And yet we still had to go to the store. We had to go to the store to get our pasta, our rice, our beans, our milk. So we had to get our staple foods from the store. We grew all of our vegetables, really easy. Our staple foods we had to get from the store. Well, staple foods. Who did I know who grew staple foods? Well, Uncle Bill. We go up to Uncle Bill's place. He's got like 50, 60 acres of corn, and he's got this hay all over the place, and he's got the cows, and we've got milk, we got cream, we got meat, and we've got corn, and it's like, but wait a minute. We still had to cut down the forest and plow up the ground in order to grow these seeds, in order to get our food, and he still had to work his ass off. That boy had 40 years worth of work, and he never took a vacation in 40 years. And it's like, I go to my house, and I get to be a slave in the garden. I work my ass off in the garden, and for what? A couple of carrots that I don't even like if you cook carrots? So screw that. And I go up to Uncle Bill's, which I have a blast doing it, and we still had to destroy everything. But in both places, it didn't matter whether it was at the farm growing staple foods or at home in the garden growing our vegetables, our vitamins and minerals. As soon as time was up, I was free. And I could go running off into the woods. I go running off into the woods, and in the spring of the year, I'm eating strawberries and raspberries. In the middle of the summer, it's like mulberries and cherries, wild plums. Later on, it's grapes, and then hazelnuts and hickory nuts. I used to collect acorns and leach the tannin out of it. I'd make brownies out of acorns. Up here in Canton were some of the biggest, most beautiful butternut trees that I ever saw, and I'd collect seed and bring them back to my place in Massachusetts, my parents' place. And one day I was sitting on a rock on the edge of the garden after I was released from my slavery. I'm thinking to myself, why is it that when I'm out there in the garden or on Uncle Bill's farm, working my ass off, getting hot and sweaty and dirty, and not really coming up with much to eat? How many of you guys have ever eaten number 2 dead corn? It's not really tasty. It's not really nutritious either. There's a lot of starch, good for you. You can put on a lot of fat. I can put on fat while eating number 2 dead corn, thank you very much. So why is it that all of this work out in the garden to get food that I don't like this food and that's not good for me anyways, when I could just come out here into the woods, into nature, and get it right here? It's beautiful. I'm in the shade. I don't have dirt all over me. It's like, well, we can't just have people start becoming foragers again. There's not enough land for us to go forage on. But what we can do is we can go out to the garden and the farm, and let's drag some of that stuff into a place that looks like the woods. And let's take the woods and drag it out into the farm. And when we're dragging the woods out into the farm, let's not just put generic anonymous plants. Let's look around us and find the plant communities that thrive in our area with sheer total utter neglect, stunning. And let's plant those out in the garden. And one of the plant communities out here happens to center around the oak. It's oak, chestnut, or beech. Those are all cousins. As an understory with the oaks were chestnuts, apples, wild apples. There were wild plums. There were wild hazelnuts. There's grapes climbing all over the whole mess. There's raspberries. There's blackberries. There's currants and gooseberries in the shade underneath. There's so much biomass being produced that something has to decompose it. So there's mushrooms that decay the leaves, the twigs, the branches, the stems. There's mushrooms on the ground, under the ground, in the roots, around the roots. Every single piece of that ecosystem is edible. And we have to cut down a 100% perennial edible ecosystem that's been through everything in order to plow up the ground to grow number 2 dent corn. I think that's really stupid. I did when I was like 12 years old. I got obsessed with the whole thing. Is how do we figure this out? How do we do this so that we can actually earn a livelihood and grow our food from a perennial ecosystem? So that's the basic premise of the concept of restoration agriculture. The term was deliberately chosen. Ecosystem restoration has a long track record of being researched, and this is how it's done. It's not like a marketing term. There's a pretty popular term out there. I'm not trying to slam anybody who's doing it, but regenerative. The term regenerative followed organic, which followed natural, which followed all these different other sustainable, all these buzzwords that have happened throughout the years that really doesn't have a huge meaning, and if it does, it's a soft meaning. And the word was coined by 2 different organization types that were having problems with organic, because organic was starting to get watered down because a big organic came into the mix and people were becoming dissatisfied with it. Does organic really mean organic anymore? Well, there were people who were certifiers. They're the police of the organic world, and they needed more farmers to police. And so they got together with the people who were selling products that needed another label that would sell more products. So you got the marketers and the police. They got together and coined this term regenerative. And that's really kind of creepy and kind of perverse, I think. Whereas ecological restoration, it's a known thing. It has a whole huge scientific community behind it. By replacing an oak plant community with an oak plant community, but go heavy with the edibles, that's ecological restoration. So we can do ecological restoration and supply us with food. And then agriculture to me means growing food, whether it's plant-based or animal-based or whatever, that's growing food. So let's do ecological restoration at the same time as we're growing food. So many people say we either get nature or agriculture, and that's a false dichotomy. It's not true at all. We can have nature and agriculture existing at the same place at the same time. Oh, but you'll never get the yields that way. Is it about yield? Let's take number 2 dent corn. 100 acres of number 2 dent corn, it's 100% corn. You're going to get 100%, so we'll give that a value of 1. Well, if I take 20% of that land away, now I only have 0.8 of number 2 dent corn. But in the 20%, I'm going to put them in rows 50 feet apart. I can slip in 50% stocking density of chestnuts. So I can put them in closer because they got more space between them. So now I have a 0.8 of corn and a 0.5 of chestnuts. 0.8 plus 0.5 is 1.3. I can teach you how to get lower yields on everything that you grow, and you'll have higher total yields. Because ecological science shows over and over again, it's the sum total number of different species that you grow on a particular area that determines the total net photosynthetic productivity. If you grow one crop, you're going to get the maximum amount of that one crop, but the minimum amount of total productivity. If you have 10,000 different species on the place, you're going to have maximum productivity, but the minimum per individual crop. So our job as farmers and gardeners, how do we balance that? How do we balance that? How can we have a much more diverse system than plain old number 2 dent corn? And how can we market that? Because you've got to have the efficiencies of being able to harvest it, process it, and sell it. And so how do I figure this out? Universities aren't studying this because there's no big industries for in universities. So I said, all right, I'll just have to do this myself. So I graduated from university, first in mechanical engineering. I failed to thrive. Matter of fact, I was about that far away from getting refused access. And so I went back to school for ecology, loved it. And then I graduated right during the Reagan administration when they were talking about getting rid of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And so, okay, I'll buy a clear cut. I'm $50,000 in debt. How do I buy a clear cut? Clear cuts are cheap, they really are. So I went out and for a small down payment, I got the clear cut, and I had owner finance, so I'm gonna pay you X amount per year. It's the same as my college loan payment, so I could handle that. And then I started to imitate the natural plant community type that was there. And lo and behold, you know what I found out? If you imitate the local plant community type, it functions like the ditch on the side of the road. Have you ever seen stuff growing on the ditch on the side of the road? We cut it with mowers, we spray it with herbicide, we throw salt on it in the wintertime, we hit it with snow plows on Friday afternoon. How many drunk 21-year-olds go crashing into the ditch and rip it all to pieces, and it comes back. And then we harass it again and again and again, and it comes back. His backyard is like this jungle of stuff. If you don't actively fight against nature here, it's going to take over your farm. So why not farm nature? It doesn't require fertilizer, fungicide, herbicide. It doesn't require 5 years of cover crops and compost and all that kind of stuff. This nature right out the window, right here, right now, is making the soil more fertile. It's providing all kinds of habitat for all kinds of creatures. Let's buy degraded real estate. Let's go ahead and now replace the ecosystems that used to be there and go heavy on the food plants. Tall trees, medium trees, short trees, shrubs, vines, shade tolerance, cane fruits, grass that grows all around. And who eats the grass? We got our cattle eats the grass. We got the pigs eat the grass. We got the sheep eat the grass. We get turkeys eating insects. We get chickens eating seeds. Name something in there that's edible. The whole thing is edible. Name something that we have to train people to eat this new food that you've never eaten before, and it actually kind of tastes weird, so we're going to come up with odd products that you'll fool yourself into eating. Nothing. This is all mainstream mass market food. We can design systems like this, and we can grow wholesale quantities of all those different products, put it on a truck, have it processed. All of a sudden, well, gee whiz, you guys don't have a chestnut processing facility up here, do you? Economic opportunity. That means let's get these ecosystems restored. Now we have the opportunity to set up this chestnut processing infrastructure. Well, what about hazelnuts? Same thing. We got to husk them, crack them, sort them, separate them, squish them into, what's that chocolate sugary, isn't that something? Last I looked, Nutella had about 500 million in sales in the USA. What if 10% of the people, let's go forget 10%, let's go to 1%. If 1% of the people going for Nutella reaches up on the shelf and grabs one of ours, that's a $5 million business by accident. So what do we have up here that's like a hazelnut? How about hazelnuts? What do we have up here that's sweet? How about maple syrup? So now we got maple syrup, but if you want, you can do beet sugar, that's fine. Okay, so chocolate. We got a trick with the chocolate. You ever heard of basswood? You guys have basswoods growing all over the place. If you take basswood seeds after they're set and you roast them, you crush them up, it's almost like chocolate. It's almost like chocolate. So now let's have a locally grown hazelnut, Nutella, whatever, and that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is telling the story. Telling the story that at some point in time, human beings realize that the era of cheap fuels to run our tractors is about over. We still have fuels for a long time, but that's about over. The era of getting cheap equipment to use, that's about over. The era of having money available to buy all these different things and a regular economy, a predictable economy that we can now tap into, that might be over. The ability of getting phosphorus from the Soviet Union might be over. The ability to get potassium from the Ukraine might be over. You ever wonder why they're fighting over there about certain things? This is about the future of food. Why not grow food? A full, complete diet with these products that we can tell this huge story about. At some point in time, we decided to do things different. Instead of destroying the ecosystem to grow non-nutritious, addictive substances, we're going to restore the ecosystems to grow real food. Highly nutritious, nutrient-dense food with a wide spectrum of all the nutrients. So the oak plant community that I mentioned quite a bit there, what are the two things in that particular food system that are missing and that are critical for the human diet? One is a minor trace mineral. We can deal with that. Selenium. You guys have selenium deficiency around here? You farmers know that, right? That's a big one with that diet. What's the second one? This is an absolutely essential, critical human nutrient that currently right now the Western diet supplies us in surplus, and now it's toxic. But salt. The terrestrial diet based around this plant community type is deficient in salt. So we would have to trade for salt. Conveniently, there's this river up to the north that goes right up to Detroit, and right at that isthmus between all the Great Lakes. Why do you think everybody gathers around the Great Lakes besides the outstanding fishing, habitat, freshwater, transportation? There's this big, huge pile of salt right at the junction between all the Great Lakes, and it's still a huge salt mine right now. So with selenium and salt, this diet that grows outside the door with no added fertilizers, no added pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, no plowing the ground, cover crops for 3 years in advance. All of the food that we need around here grows right here, and we can tell the story. We can tell the story how we got our stuff together, and we're coming up with these real cool products. Socks, wool socks. If somebody would just start making wool socks, for crying out loud, real good wool socks. There's another, all the business opportunities, the flowering of economy that we could have with healthy people if we just imitate the ecosystems, restore the ecosystems. Back to the clear cut. So what made sense for me when I restored this clear cut? Economic sense. If I'm spending all this money trying to figure out what to grow, and I'm having success, I'm having failures, and I'm learning as I go, the one thing that I had is this long-term eye on the prize, is all that I had to do was plant the tree that has the longest term, highest value at all the different sawmills around where I'm at, plant that, and in the humid east, that now becomes an economically viable business, buying the real estate, replanting the timber. And on the first clear cut I bought, it was a red oak system. So if I planted red oak, if I planted 60 stems per acre, in 50 years that would add $70,000 per acre to that property. There's a financial calculation called the net present value. The net present value is all of these different cash flows with the red oak, $70,000, divided by how many years between me and 40, gives me the net present value. You now add that to the value of the real estate. When you add that to the value of the real estate, you go to the bank, you borrow against it, you buy another one. Then you go do the same thing to the next one, you borrow against that, you pay off the first one, you get the third one. You do the restoration on that one, you go to the fourth one, you pay off the second one, and so on and so on and so on. You can either become a non-selling flipper or you can become a selling flipper. It was all based on the real estate becoming more valuable and the timber becoming more valuable. The property that I live on in Wisconsin, the neighboring properties around where I was at, 100 acres would sell for about $800,000. I sold my place this last winter. Take a guess. 4.2 million. 4.2 million. It had nothing to do with the agriculture. It's not growing food to sell food. Did your dad ever make a killing growing food? Anybody grow food here? Anybody getting stinking filthy rich? No, it's not. So let's think about the economics differently. The economics are the real estate, this long-term value addition of the timber, and then all along the way we get a side effect of food. Highly nutritious, nutrient-dense food that we can now turn into all these different kinds of products. Let's go to my farm in Wisconsin, and let's say I cut down all the red oak trees. I make my 70,000 per acre and nice big beautiful red oaks. They grow fast there. We got great soil out there. what happened to the chestnuts and the apples and the cherries and the plums and the hazelnuts and the raspberries and the grapes and the grass and the animals that were there when I cut down the red oak?
Still there.
They're still there. So I'm still farming it. What happens to the red oak after I cut it down? It sprouts back. It sprouts back. So we can restore the ecosystems of this planet at a profit. Within 15 years, we're living in paradise again and eating much better food, and the agriculture still may not pay its way. It doesn't have to. It has to feed us, supply us with our food, fuels, medicines, building materials, fibers, and it's the value of the real estate and the timber long term that make it numerically make sense if somebody has a PhD and they want you to show how the numbers work. Because so many people think, well, the numbers have to work. Can you show me how it's... I'm going to use an example, hazelnuts. All of the upper Midwest, most of the New York right now, to grow the hazelnuts that survive around here, even the improved varieties, it's not economically feasible. Well, you know why? Because they're looking at the old economic model that is in free fall right now, okay? So you got these big businesses that are controlled by shareholder boards, they have to get their return on that, and they can buy hazelnuts in the open market for, a nickel for a ton. That's just a made up number, but really cheap for product. So therefore, you have to supply your nuts to be wicked cheap, or I'm not gonna buy it. You do the math, it doesn't work financially. Or you say, okay, wait a minute. I'm gonna make a product, Nutella. And in this Nutella, what's the first ingredient in Nutella? Sugar. Sugar. And then it's hazelnuts, and then chocolate, and then palm kernel oil. Why palm kernel oil? Because they're taking the hazelnut, they're squishing out the oil, selling that for like $700 a gallon, and then they're buying 700 barrels of palm kernel oil for the same amount of money, adding it to your hazelnuts. Well, if you took the hazelnuts in Nutella, and if the product sells for $10, I can do math with tens. If it sells for $10 a jar, and hazelnuts were 10%, if the hazelnuts got 10% of the sale price, all of a sudden you're making $400 a pound on hazelnuts. Bingo! Hazelnuts profitable. Hazelnuts are profitable because we're making a product. The goal of this product is to support the farmers and the local community and economic renewal of our area. It's not to have the lowest price of the ingredients coming in so the stockholders and the board members can make $50 zillion a year. There's enough dollars in the food economy to feed farmers well. It's just a choice on the part of the people who are selling our products that it's not paying the farmers well. So it's time for us to get together, make our own products, and pay ourselves well. And then we can get our belly fat from something other than number 2 dent corn, and we can travel around to really cool parts of the country and meet some really neat people and change the world. Because if you know anything about Mark Shepard, I'm all about changing the world. Thank you for tolerating me. Any question answered? You want me to just kick you out?
Sure, I mean, if folks have questions or for Mark Shepard.
And just out of curiosity, how long was that?
Exactly 30 minutes.
How many?
30 minutes.
Okay. All right. So I got to cut that down.
Just wondering real quick, you got all these super dairy farms. Now, how are they actually making money?
They aren't. The dairy farms aren't making money. The row croppers aren't making money. People doing conventional ag aren't making any money. And if anyone wants to argue that they are, bring it on. Bring it in, mofo. No, they aren't. And no, it's okay. They don't call it subsidy anymore. Everybody, they're on welfare. The big ag, conventional farmers using chemicals are on welfare. And it doesn't matter if they're getting their corn base, the loan deficiency payments, name the program. I stay away from those. One of the things a lot of people say is like, how are we going to convince those people to do it differently? It's like, no, that's not our job. Our job is to help one another to do it the right way and to focus our energy on making a new kind of agriculture, because there are enough people out there who want to make this work that they want to change, and I'm here to help. And I don't have time to waste trying to convince somebody who doesn't want to hear it. So. Did I successfully answer any questions? So what?
It's just hard to see where all these super farms are, where they got the, you know, these big tractors that are worth about 800 grand or whatever, and they got like 10 of them, and then you see all this other equipment, and there's, you know, it's just hard to think of how can they afford those and make money to pay for that or do this.
And one of the interesting things, I have to credit one of my neighbors who was one of these big ag, who was a row cropper. They had a really bad year and crop failure and all this kind of stuff. I said, well, what are you going to do? Because, you know, I was an organic farmer. I'm doing cattle and hogs and produce. I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, oh, you just roll it over. You just refinance. And it's like, wait a minute. That's a magic ingredient that I forgot, because now 5 years goes by, the property's worth more. I've paid the note down a little bit. I've refinanced. I can now put borrowed money in my pocket. That's not taxable income. It's a loan. And take the rest of it and improve the property again, and screw the agriculture. As long as it's not breaking my bank, I can just keep doing the agriculture, and any kind of vegetables that are off quality, pigs get some of them and I get some of them, so I have all the food I need. I'm getting 100% utilization of my crop. I'm putting non-taxable income in my pocket, and I've got money now to do the next improvement. That works, because that's what they're doing too a lot, is they just keep rolling forward and hoping that it works. There's also, I don't need to get into the different government loan programs that you go in, because they graduate you on purpose. After a certain number of years go by, you now have to upgrade and do the next step that they tell you what to do, or else they won't loan you ever again. I went through the first 2 phases, and I didn't want to upgrade and start putting the big, stainless steel grain bins on my property. And so I said, well, you'll never get a loan again. It's like, well, I guess I won't. And so then that's how they weed out the ones who don't want to play that game. But with those people, if you all of a sudden start putting a row of trees between each field, so you got soybeans, row of trees, corn, row of trees, soybeans, row of trees. Now you cover all this landscape again with some trees that aren't just generic trees, but they're food-producing trees. Man, the extra food that we can be producing, high-value food. Chestnuts right now, I was getting $5 a pound selling them, and that's wholesale. That's a wholesale price for that. The hazelnuts, the hazelnut oil that gets pressed out of my nuts sells for $1,720 a gallon. Isn't that crazy?
What do they use that for?
Cosmetics. Cosmetics. And what's neat about the cosmetics is it doesn't have to be food grade. None of the equipment has to be food grade, so it's less expensive to go ahead and put up all the processing equipment you need. And so back to scale. Has anyone ever heard of Organic Valley? I know that might be a swear word around here, but I was grower number 24 at Organic Valley. And what we did is we would all pool our products together to access the truck that would take it to the wholesale markets. And within 15 years of me joining Organic Valley, it went from a $300,000 company to a $1 billion company with a B. It's now the 98th largest food company on the face of the planet. It's the only one in all of the organic community that's on that top 100 list. It's the only one that's exclusively owned by the farmers. It's not corporate owned. So we can do the same thing. It doesn't have to be a co-op. We can have it be a corporation. And then we have some of our shares that we now sell to investors and shareholders, get all kinds of bank and put in our pockets, and to have the super high pay price to the farmers. So let's get creative with what we're doing, and we can do it at scale. Are there any Organic Valley farmers up in this neck of the woods?
Yeah.
There are. And they're dairy, because the dairy is a big
Dairy.
And like anything, if just because you join Organic Valley and you join forces as farmers sticking together, doesn't mean things get easy. Because they're out there against the Cargills and Danone and all the big ones. Bloody noses and split knuckles and all that kind of stuff. So, what are you eating?
Cookie.
Okay, I thought you were going to raise your hand. All right, well, thank you very much.
So you're buying properties and then improving them, and then you can go to financing properties and then pay off the previous one, so in that scenario, you're constantly expanding. And you have to keep expanding to then keep paying off the previous properties you own, or what's, because to me that kind of seems fragile and also a symptom of conventional agriculture.
Well, it's a symptom of the economic system.
Yeah.
Because as a guy who just wanted to hang out in the woods and be a bum, what do you do if you just want to hang out in the woods and be a bum? Well, okay, I'll take responsibility for myself, I'll feed myself. I'm not going to plow up a piece of ground and try to grow beans. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to grow an ecosystem and live there. I'll eat pigs, have them eat, acorns. So how do I get that land? It required me to play the real estate game. And by playing the real estate game that way, it allowed me to accumulate larger pieces of real estate and actually now made the agriculture viable, because the quantity of like selling 35,000 pounds of squash per acre, now you're talking about some serious change. That can make $3 to $6 grand an acre all by myself, with organic vegetables, the hand harvested ones. So at any point in time, I can stop, but why would I? Why would I continue to watch these farms get eroded and washed down the gully when I know that that farm family is struggling, and I can step in and say, hey, I'll take this problem off your hands. I'll pay them off. I'll do the ecological rehab on that place, get everything all planted up. Now let's say there's a young couple that might want to start farming. I'm into the real estate investment with the long-term ecological restoration, and timber is one of the plays. Now you guys can come in, you don't have to pay for the mortgage, you don't have to pay for all this infrastructure cost, because the real estate investor, me, pays for that. I'll give you a super smoking deal. How about $1,000 a year rent? Now you get a place to live and start your farm business for $1,000 a year. Then after we go through a number of years, it's worth this much money, we can cut it all down and I can pocket the money to buy another one, or I can now get it appraised and that higher value because it has all the timber on it. Now let's take that and donate it to a nonprofit organization, have a conservation easement on it that says you have to farm it this way. And now, as long as you guys are still farming there and you're still happy there, do you really need to own that property? If you've got a lifetime lease and a life estate that can be passed down through the generations just like the land, how many people around here, the larger farmers, actually own all their land? They're leasing it from so many other people. So what's the difference if we lease it to somebody else? So after I sold the property in Wisconsin, it was donated to a nonprofit organization. And I get a life estate and I can stay there as long as I want. For $500 a year, I got a better deal than you. Because I know the guy who did the trick, So yes, it's a symptom of the economy. I don't think it's fragile. What's fragile is what we feel inside, because it might make you think differently than the way you were trained. You were trained that debt is bad. You're going to put it on. You're going to be a slave to this for the rest of your life. And as a farmer, you're not going to make any money. You've got to struggle to make ends meet and all that kind of stuff. And that's a lie foisted upon you by the whole financial world. It's not that way. It's not that way. We can restore the ecosystems of this planet, produce more food per unit area, and live a really good life and create amazingly economically vibrant communities wherever we go. And that's what I do. And that's what I'm going to do, and I'll help you however I can. Have I got a deal for you? Let's talk afterwards. but that's actually where it comes in. That's the fragility. Is when all of a sudden I say, okay, here, sign there. Once you sign there, you're in. And when there's lambs coming down on a freezing rain at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're out there rescuing them. If it's a Friday afternoon and something else has to happen, you're doing that. You're not going to a drum festival. It changes who you are, because now you're on call. You're on call. Anyways, thanks again. Oh, we got more questions. This guy won't stop.
No, I'm a long time heard about you. I heard you speak 15 years ago from after Mayor and Farming Process. And but I saw my life living in New York City, 45 years, real estate. And it just hit me like a rock when you're describing the situation a typical farmer is. It's exactly the same situation a typical real estate investor in New York City. They're losing money on the day-to-day operations of these apartment buildings. The only way they survive is to be increased value. In 5 years, they refi, put more money back in, and eventually they cash out and retire. I mean, not to mention the name Trump, God forbid, a real estate tycoon from Europe. But that's exactly the same scenario, just in a different venue. And at some point, this whole house of cards just can't continue.
And here's the difference with the whole house of cards, and this is the reason why I keep doing it, is if you have all these cracker box pieces of crap buildings, that the whole house of cards, the economic system falls apart, that's it, it's over, there's nothing there. I want to leave in my wake restored ecosystems that can provide all the food, fuel, medicines, fiber, building materials that human beings and wildlife need. I'm leaving intact ecosystems in my wake. So if you want to come in and go ahead and scoop these up cheap and then cut it all down and turn it into ass wipe and grow corn again, that's your business. But I put the ecosystem in place that you never have to do that again. So that's what I feel is totally different, is we're restoring the ecosystems of the planet. 50% of the planet right now is degraded soils in agricultural land. 50% of the planet. That used to be 50% more life support system on this planet that would give us clean air, clean water, wildlife habitat, and food. The bison. The bison were eradicated on purpose as a genocide to get rid of the people who were already living here. And the people who moved here, they had the same thing happen to them over in Europe called the Enclosure Act. They put an enclosure around everything and kick you off your land and say, but we got a deal for you, hang on, you go over here and you kill all these other people who have red skin and then you can have their land, but you have to grow these commodity crops that you can now sell to us. It's the same racket going back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. It's time to turn that around, restore the abundance of the ecosystem that was here, and we can do it at a profit. And if we have to use the economic system the way it is right now, so be it.
Yeah, you're using the system against it.
Well, no, we're not using it against it. I really take issue with that.
Right.
I'm not using the economic system. I'm not using Master's tools to tear down Master's house.
Right.
I'm using Master's tools to recreate the house that Master fucking destroyed in the first place.
Right.
And if he can't keep it together, we're going to have to do what we can to keep it together.
Yeah.
And as those of us living on the land and close to the land, we have a lot thinner margins than a lot of people. We have a lot smaller cushions than a lot of people. It's in our best interest to take care of ourselves and our community. That's why I applaud this whole community, engagement thing. We need to take care of one another because nobody else is looking out for us. So let's create a food system that requires no imported fertilizers, fossil fuels, sprays, this, that, and the other thing. That'll be here. They can come in, they cut it all down with bulldozers, they can hit it with napalm, and it sprouts back next year. Look at the ditch on the side of the road as you go home, and you think how resilient that is. That's the kind of resilient agricultural ecosystem we can create. Enough questions before I lose my voice. I got some high notes I got to sing here. This is going to be Thank you.
Do you get it now why I have been watching his videos for over 10 years and why I was so excited to actually connect with him? So we're going to take a short break, is that correct, Caroline? Short break, and then we're going to do some music and we're going to have some more conversation in the songs. Totally support his message, so stick around and get some cider, get some tea, get some food, stuff like that.